What's good, you guys? It's Lifestyle from lifestyledidit.com, and in today's video I'm going to be going over mastering with stock plugins and two free plugins that I think are better than the stock plugins, so obviously you can get those. We're going to count them as stock plugins today. I am going to do a video in the future on mastering with paid plugins, obviously, but a lot of you guys have wanted me to cover mastering with stock plugins, so that's what we're going to get into today. And before we get into that, I just want you guys to know that I don't personally master my beats really, and the reason why you're probably wondering, and a lot of producers will tell you this, is because I'm using quality sounds, I'm using quality VSTs, and it really just comes down to leveling and a bit of EQ sometimes, maybe sidechaining the kick and the 808, but it's really just leveling, and then I turn up my master via a limiter, or I use a clipping method to get my beat loud after already having headroom. So I don't need to stick stuff on my master for no reason. Now, when I used to engineer, mix, and master full songs, I was getting songs that I didn't produce myself and I didn't record, so I was needing to put things on the master because the whole beat overall needed certain elements and it needed cuts here and boosts there, and I didn't have the files to adjust. So a little background of what mastering is. Basically, mastering is the last step. Back then you would have someone engineer the song, then you would have someone mix the song, and then you would have a mastering engineer come who would get just a wave file of the whole overall stereo wave file, which is the combination of everything into one file. He would get that, he's never heard it before, and then in his ear he would hear certain things and adjust the overall mix. So if he thought the mix was a little too dark on the wave file that he got, he would do things on obviously the master, because it's the master recording, to make it brighter or punchier or this or that. Nowadays, since we kind of do everything, if you already chose quality good sounds and your mix is already really good, then throwing stuff on your master is pointless because you're probably going to be messing up the good mix you already have. You just need to put either a limiter on it or a clipper to get it to the loudness level. But in this tutorial, I'm going to be using free and stock VSTs to show you a few ways that you can master your beats if you have certain issues or you're mastering for someone else. Let's get into it. Alright, so we have this beat right here, and I'm going to let you guys hear it. So you'll hear that's just the mix alone. Okay, so it already sounds pretty good, but I haven't done anything leveling wise. I'm just gonna basically have a rough level, and I'm gonna show you guys on the master track a few tricks we can do if we wanted to do certain things to this beat overall. Okay, so as you can see, first off, we have headroom. That is very important. That is the level before 0. So we have about -3 dB of headroom. So we have 3 decibels before we hit 0. We need headroom. Over here, you're going to see I already have the plugins enabled. This is what I'm going to use and show you a few tricks. So the first one is going to be distortion. And when you're mastering, a lot of mastering engineers will add saturation to warm it up, kind of give it some life. And you can do this with saturation, which is also can be discussed as distortion. If you use it strong enough, it compresses the signal and breaks it up. FL does not have really a saturation plugin, so we're going to be using the Fruity Fast Distortion plugin very lightly, and that's going to give us like a saturation effect. So if I go over here and turn it on, I'm going to let you see what it does, and then I'll explain it. So if I go ahead and press play, watch the meter for a second. I'm going to turn it off. And if I turn it on, it's already doing a very small amount of compression, kind of, because it's distorting the sound, it's breaking it up. This plugin acts kind of as a compressor as well as it distorts. So it's kind of, instead of jumping around, it's kind of leveling it. So what we did over here is we took the threshold. So if I turn this all the way on, you'll hear, obviously it's going to distort it. All right, sounds terrible. We're going to turn the threshold down a lot. Okay, so press play. Now you can see it's like really compressing it and it's really distorting it. So we're going to go over here and we're going to turn down our mix knob a little bit. So basically just mess around with this, and this is just kind of adding a little bit of saturation to your overall mix and master, and it's just making it sound a bit warmer. So like I said, very light threshold, and then we're doing a very light mix on the mix knob, and it's something that you can't hear too much. It's not day and night, but it's the little things in mastering that bring it a long way. So if you read up and do research on mastering engineers, they will always tell you very small effects, meaning how you perceive it, how you hear it. It's very, very little, but overall it does a lot, because the mix engineer sends the mastering engineer a track, right? If the mastering engineer sends it back and it sounds 3 times different, they're not going to like it. The mastering engineer is there to pretty much just get the mix to sound even better. But when you're doing this all yourself and you're choosing your plugins, your sounds, you really only need to level, because it should already sound really good. So during mixing, leveling, EQ, maybe you're compressing, but there's not too much compression needed in beats because there's not too much dynamic going on. So this first one is just going to be a very small amount of warmth. You can hear it kind of glues the track together a little more. Okay, next, so let's start this back, and then let's listen to the beat, and what we're going to do is go hunt around for this frequency I'm hearing of boxiness. So I'm going to press play. So somewhere in like 300 to 600, I'm hearing a lot of like boxiness. So I'm going to go hunt for that. So I'm going to take one of these bands, and with the mouse, I'm going to make this a very narrow band, and I'm going to go hunt around for what I'm hearing and then take it out. So I think we already found it, but let's keep going. Let me see. Okay, and the only reason I was able to hear that personally and know I didn't like it around 400 to 600 is because I have a lot of experience in engineering, mixing, mastering, because a lot of you guys know before I started doing what I'm doing now with producing, drum kits, selling beats, all that, I was in studios, professional studios, and I was running live theater sound. So I had a lot of experience with mixing and then mastering while I was in the studio. So it kind of just comes to me. But after training your ear for a long time, you'll start to hear these things. So there's a lot of buildup right there that I don't like. So I'm going to go in here with a very narrow cut. I'm going to bring this down, and I'm only going to bring it down maybe about 2.5 to 3 dB, because you don't want to put holes in your mix by bringing out, because remember, we're affecting the entire master, which is the entire beat. So if we start putting ginormous holes, it's going to be empty. So we're going to do very small effects. Remember, I told you that go a long way. So we're going to take this out a tiny bit. Now, a trick I learned when I used to mix metal music from metal engineers is that when they do, shout out to Joey Sturgis, when they do narrow cuts, they do broad boosts on top of the narrow cut. It sounds really weird, but here's what I mean. So we have this narrow cut. Now we're going to take another band. We're going to make it pretty broad, and we're going to just gently put it over it by like maybe 1.5 dB. And the reason he does this is because on an EQ, when you do a narrow cut like this, it's not only taking 417 that we selected down here, it's also taking frequencies from here and here, like, you know, maybe 400 and then up to like 500, but 417's down here. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, when you do a cut over here, there is 3,000, right? Let's just say this is 3,000. I can't see the number, I'm blind. But you see how it's bringing down frequencies over here too. So this broad boost right here kind of just comes in and boosts a little bit of those frequencies, kind of keeps them the same, so we're really just getting that narrow cut. So it's a really cool trick to do. So if I press play, turn these two off, you hear the mix glues a little bit together. It sounds a little bit better. It's more clear and more warm. And that's just off 2 plugins. Like I said, these are very small adjustments. You're not going to be going crazy with this and making it huge. The next one is multi-band compression. If you don't know what that is, go do a lot of research on it. It's kind of confusing when you first start, honestly. But this is another free plugin I found because I don't like the multi-band that FL gives. So this one's a little bit easier to look at, but they don't default everything to 0, which is really annoying. So when you first bring this plugin on, it's pretty CPU heavy too, which kind of sucks, so you might not like it. But if we just go to default, you're gonna hear it does horrible things to the mix. It's just doing too much. So what we're gonna do is have to go in here and reset all of this. So you see these thresholds are all pulled down. So let's just go in here and then I'll explain further. So let's just make sure none of these levels are higher, that these thresholds are all the way up so that they're not touching anything. And then I'll explain the mix. Okay, we're good. Low cut is off. All right, so very easily, multi-band compression is basically an EQ compressor. So we can take certain bands of frequencies, like let's say 0 hertz to 200 hertz, and then over here it's 200 to 600. So these two are two different bands that we can compress differently. So if we want to compress the mid-range, we can compress the mid-range. Just imagine a compressor that is allowing you to touch either low end, high end, or mid-range, right? It's the easiest way to think about it, but it's very hard to use if you don't know. And what we're going to do with this plugin is add high end. And you guys are like, oh, why don't you just take an EQ and boost the high end? Well, for this, what we're going to do, which is kind of cool and crazy to think about, is only on the top end, like let's say, 1 kilohertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz. We're going to slightly compress it and then turn the gain back up, which is in essence going to give us more high end. So if I show you guys what I mean, if we go to band 2 and mute it, and then band 1 and mute it, we're only going to hear high end because this band is only giving us high end frequencies. So we can go in here, bring down our threshold. You see it's showing us where it's going to start going, so the visual is kind of cool. We can make this bigger too, so we're starting to affect it. Now if we turn our ratio up, if you haven't seen my video on compression, go check that out. I explain what all these knobs do. But basically threshold, we're telling it when to turn on, and ratio, we're telling it at how much. I explained that better in my other video about compression. If I over exaggerate, you'll hear it. Now we're getting compression, right? It's destroying it. So if we go back and we do a light ratio, 3 to 1, 2 to 1, and we start to bring this down a little bit until we start to see a little bit of gain reduction right here. Now we're doing maybe 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction on the top end. What we're going to do now is go over here to our attack and release, and we can adjust them. So for our attack and release, we want the top end to be a bit more like bite, more punch. So we're going to do a slow attack so that the transient comes through, and then after we cut it off. So if you have like a transient like this, right, and then you come in, let a little bit through and cut this off, it kind of makes it more peaky. I explained this in my compression tutorial as well, but basically a fast attack will come in and chop this off right at the beginning, so it's going to make it softer. If we come in and we chop it off after a little bit, we let a little bit signal through, and then boom, now we get a more bitey, more punchy sound. So we're going to have a kind of slowish attack, and we're going to go maybe 6 milliseconds, and a faster release, so we let off. So now we're making it more spiky on the top end, right? So we're going to press play, and we're only going to take off maybe 2 dB. So we're going to watch right here. This is how much we're compressing. And now, since we took off 2 dB, we can add 2 dB. So now if we bring everything back in, on these other bands, we're not going to touch these for this tutorial. We're going to leave those normal because we're only using the third band to get more high end out of our track. So now if I go ahead and take this plugin off, you're going to hear that we lose some high end. So let's go ahead and press play. If I take it off, on. You heard that gave us a lot more high end, right? Make sure your mix, these are the master, basically the master effects of this plugin. Make sure the mix is all the way up. You don't want to use low cut unless you want to be cutting out low frequencies, which is fine, but we're not using it for that reason. So we're going to have that off and the gain at 0. These bands are going to all, make sure you set them how I have it set. This is off, ratio down, level at 0, and your threshold at 0. They don't have really an on and off button from what I found, which kind of sucks. So it's going to mess up your mix when you first put it on. So make sure to just go to band 1, ratio at 1, threshold 0, level at 0. Same for here, and that'll basically turn them off. And then for band 3, all we did is bring our threshold down to where it starts playing. We have a ratio of about 3:1, and then we made a slow attack, fast release. We did about 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction, so we added it back in. If you guys want me to do a tutorial on just multi-band compression, I will as well, but just check out my tutorial on compression to understand it a little bit more. Now, the last thing we need to do, as you can see, we're still not at 0 dB. We still have headroom, so we still have more volume we can get out of this track. Now we're going to put a limiter, which is the last thing that you put on your master to make sure you're not clipping and you're pushing your mix, okay, to get it louder. You can clip as well. I have videos on how to clip, but for this, we're going to be going safe and just doing limiting. So if I turn this on, we have easy. It's easier to read than the FL limiter. So that's why I'm using this one so you guys can understand. So the normal in sound engineering is to have the output set to -0.3. So that lets us not hit 0 dB, right? Because if we turn this off and we press play and we start to turn up this threshold, it's gonna let us clip. So if we go over here and go to -0.3, that is 0.3 right below 0, and that lets us not clip, but it's going to allow us to bring our threshold and push our track as loud as we can before it starts to sound nasty without hitting 0 dB. This doesn't mean you can set it to 0.3 and start pushing your threshold as high as you want and getting it as loud as you want. It'll still end up distorting and causing clipping internally because you can't push sound to infinity. Obviously, you're still compressing it on a limiter. It's a compressor on steroids. So we're going to set our output to -0.3, and now we could take our threshold and start bringing it up. And on this gain reduction, we're going to want to do anywhere from like 3 to 4 dB of gain reduction. Anything more than that will probably end up sounding nasty, but let's try. Let's figure it out. So you're going to see we're going to start to push the volume of our track. You see we're doing around 2. Let's keep going. Let's see what sounds nasty. Hear our kicks getting really soft, so let's back this off and let's do about 3 to 4 like I said. Alright, that sounds good to me. Now if we turn it off, listen to how much volume we lose. And we still have punch, so we can go a little bit more. Alright, any more than that, the kick was kind of getting soft, so let's just leave it like that. So if I show you guys before and after, let me put these a little bit closer, and I'll obviously edit the video so you can see them right after each other. So this is before, and I'm going to do the limiter after, but I'm going to just show you the 3 effects that we put on. So this is dry. And now when we add in the limiter, before, and with the limiter. Alright. Alright, so that was just a quick tutorial on how to master with free and stock plugins. If you guys did like this tutorial, leave a thumbs up. You can follow me on all social medias at Lifestyle Did It. Make sure to hit my site lifestyledidit.com for everything else. Make sure to drop a comment down below. As always, subscribe to your boy, push notifications, you know what I'm saying?